series. Our title today is to bring your veterinary practice into the 21st century. Ditch your old school leadership style for one that fits today's way of working. And I'm super excited to have a close friend of mine, Mr. Rob Trimble, here with us today. Rob is from the Harbour community. Our webinar today is going to consist of about a half an hour discussion, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. And at the end, feel free to stick around. I'm going to give a little demo of Talkatoo, the reason for this webinar series. So let's move on to the topic. Today, practices rely on the traditional hierarchical style leadership, where only those in the top positions are able to make decisions for the business. More and more businesses are moving to a distributed leadership model, where decisions can be made at any level of the organization, which allows for more flexibility, response-oriented organizations that can adapt to challenges quickly. Rob and I are going to discuss how you can pull ahead of the pack by replacing your outdated leadership style with a distributed model to improve speed, productivity, and innovation all inside your practice. Really excited to do this. My name is Shawn Wilkie. I'm the CEO of Talkatoo, as well as the host of the Veterinary Innovation Podcast, is what it's called, Rob. My words are slipping from me today. And so without further ado, I want to introduce my friend, Rob. Me and Dr. Rob Trimble have been friends for a couple of years now. And it all started in Kansas City, where I happen to be today, which is kind of funny. We were just talking about how it's full circle. Mm-hmm. Rob's a veterinarian and an entrepreneur with a passion for innovation at the intersection of medicine, technology, and organizational design. Currently, he serves as the executive executive director at the Veterinary Entrepreneurship Academy, with the goal of accelerating innovation and entrepreneurship from within the veterinary profession, starting with veterinary students. He's also vice president of the Harbour Community, an online network that helps veterinary professionals and students take ownership of their careers and well-being. Rob spent several years working in the pet health technology industry. It was a co-founder of Fuzzy Pet Health, a pet health technology startup based in San Francisco. Rob likes small towns, big waves, authentic conversation, and preparing business leaders for the future of rapid change. Rob, holy God, that was a lot to read. Welcome. Good to have you.
I apologize on that, man. I think I need to shorten that up a little bit there. Appreciate it, Shawn. Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah, man. So let's get right into it. What are the pitfalls of traditional leadership hierarchy, especially in veterinary medicine?
Yeah. Before we dig in, can I set a little bit of context, set the big picture so we can drill down into that?
Go. It's all you.
Love it. So let's first off, I think it'd be useful to define what we mean by hierarchy, or even traditional forms of leadership with that hierarchy, right? Because I think a lot of people today hear that word hierarchy and they think it's immediately bad. And I think maybe initially I maybe could have thought that too, but after digging into it and seeing more of the nuance of it, I see that even in this new form, hierarchy is everywhere. It just takes on a different form, right? So it really, I think, to set the stage for this conversation, it would be good to go back and say, how did we get here first, right? Because we weren't this model. When you look around at all our organizations, whether they're in business, church or religious organizations, governmental organizations, the family, right? It has historically been built around this, command and control, top-down, hierarchical, almost pyramidal style of authority and power, right? And when you look back to one of the last major disruptions that our society faced, let's go back to the Industrial Revolution, right? We were undergoing a massive shift, kind of similar to what we are today. We were moving away from very agrarian society, where things were made a very bespoke manner, to things where we're putting a process through an assembly line, where we're creating a mass market of products. We're creating mass output. That's the goal. It's efficiency was the core metric that we were dialing in our factories to be able to put out this widget with ever increasing efficiency. And that worked really well for the business environment of the Industrial Revolution. And that's the key thing to hone in on here first off, is that we're in a different environment today than what we have been in the past. The model that we've all grown up with as a society, this top-down command and control style of leadership, it's been there for a reason, and it's been very successful for the last 150, 200 years in this environment that we've inherited. But that environment has shifted radically, especially seeing it change and accelerate after the internet came along, right? So now we're seeing just this massive explosion in this network mentality, as opposed to very top-down command and control pyramid mindset. It's important to note here that like the efficiency and all of the work and all the good of that model from the Industrial Revolution, this traditional approach to leadership, that's still good. I don't think anybody's saying that efficiency isn't what you should be focusing on, especially with increasing inflation and the market that we're going into today. I think efficiency is increasingly important, but it's this is a yes and situation, right, Shawn? It's like,
yeah,
efficiency is important, and what is increasingly more so important in today's business environment is to be adaptive and responsive to those changes. Because it doesn't matter how efficient you are, if you can't evolve to the stresses that your business faces, then you're going to perish, right? That's how evolution works. This is a form of economic evolution, I suppose, right? So maybe I'll stop there. Does that help like set the stage for sort of how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So, and I mean, I get that. And I think our listeners too, as well. I mean, this is something that's familiar in every area. You know, we know the pyramid, we know the guy or the gal that's at the top of the pyramid, usually setting, you know, the stage for how the business operates. And so, you know, what's different, or what is this idea of a distributed leadership model?
Let's dig into it.
And what, you know, why is that different? Why is it maybe better? Why is it cool. why and how could it be helpful for the people that have joined us today?
Let's see if we can dig into that. So I want to take you back again to my fourth year of veterinary school. I remember getting into clinics and thinking, oh man, we've been spending all this time, all this money going to school. We're finally able to put our hands on animals. We're finally doing the thing we've been here for, right? What we're training for. Surely people are going to be excited, going to be happy to be here, right? Nope. And that's the opposite of what I saw. I saw suffering, right? I saw misery. I saw a very clear sense of fear in the culture, right? I saw a lack of accountability. I saw poor communication, right? You were asking what were some of the ills of this old school approach to leadership? I was seeing it in real time in my environment. Poor communication, unmotivated staff, low creativity from the team members. Disengagement, which leads to increased turnover, certain people having a sense of entitlement over their importance, and certainly, and a big one here, is not having a sense of shared purpose to what we were all working on. And so I remember thinking like, that's really weird. What is going on here? Why are these people miserable if they're doing the thing that we've been training to do all this time? I was being trained as a doctor, right, to look at the symptoms of disease and look for the root cause of the illness. So I thought maybe that symptoms that I'm seeing here in this culture and in this organization and the way people work together, maybe that can be looked at like a symptom, and I can start digging into what would maybe be the root cause of the disease that's leading to these symptoms. And so that's really where I started going down this rabbit hole of organizational design, but really it was selfish interests. I thought for my own sanity, for no other reason than when I get out and graduate, I want to be able to create my own organization that I can come to work and flourish and enjoy being there for the next 20 years. All right. So I said, what are those core things that a leader can bring into a culture that leads to a sense of increased positive well-being? I went this deep dive in vet school around the science of happiness, positive well-being. Got out of vet school, went to the Bay Area, started getting in the startup space and started studying technology and asking a similar question. What can leaders do to build their culture and their business in such a way that allows them to keep up with the pace of change that we're already seeing today and that we know is going to increase in the future? And what shocked me is that there were, three broad areas of focus that applied to both of those two problems, the well-being piece and the keeping up with the pace of change. All right, it's autonomy was the first piece, the big bucket. That's the first one to start focusing on, is increasing the amount of autonomy that your people and your workforce have. The second piece was facilitating an environment where people can come to work and be really deeply engaged and see themselves grow in a meaningful skill set, something that's very important to them, but also contributes to the business. That psychological need there is called competency. So that's the other one, competency or mastery or growth, a lot of different names for it. And then the last piece, the third pillar that showed up in both of the solutions or approaches to solving those two big issues of well-being and keeping up the pace of change, was having a strong, effectively, community, having a sense of meaning and purpose to the work that you're doing, and being really strongly connected with others in the pursuit of a commonly shared goal and commonly shared values. So it's those three things. If you do those three things from a well-being standpoint, it improves the well-being of your people and your business. If you also implement those things, you can see a benefit from an organizational agility and a responsiveness standpoint, right? So I saw some of those things, right? The turnover, the lack of accountability, the fear. I said, what's going on here? What's the underlying disease? And so I started looking at the organizational design and said, maybe there's a different way to organize, something that would drive positive well-being. These three nuggets, these three pillars are where I started. And I kept asking and kept looking throughout the veterinary profession and beyond for examples of companies that were emphasizing those three pillars. I've since learned that it's grown to 6 sort of broad principles that we see as really important in making that shift that we'll dig into here in just a minute.
So Rob, let me back you up a minute. Because, you've got such a, an interesting path compared to a lot of vets that, go to vet school and then go into clinical practice. You went into the startup world in San Francisco, where this idea of, decisions being made as a collective is kind of part of the fabric. And so what was that transition? And just to pause you and kind of throw you off a little bit, because that's what I like to do.
Love it.
What was that transition from, like, you're going down the veterinary world, and yes, you're still a practicing veterinarian, you're in the vet space, but you're also in the intersection of tech and vet, and those things don't really match up that well in a lot of ways. So maybe help the people kind of understand what day 1 through 100 of the startup world was like compared to what the vet world was like, because I think there's a really nice tie-in that will help people understand this difference, this change.
Yeah, this idea around innovation and how innovation actually develops, right? So, and actually before I get there, when I graduated, I didn't go straight into the startup space. I knew that we wanted a different, my wife was also going to vet school with me at the time. We both graduated together from vet school. We said, the future that we're going to inherit probably looks a lot different. We're going to experience a lot of change. Change is uncomfortable. My wife grew up on a farm. I grew up on a little farm in Illinois. We said, for a couple of farm kids, what is the most uncomfortable thing we can imagine doing? And let's go do that thing. Let's figure out how to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because we knew that was coming. So let's figure out how we can deal with it now. So we said, California's pretty scary. Let's go there. We actually ended up finding a little hospital in the Monterey Bay area. It was kind of a conservative little ranch town that was somewhat similar to the area that we grew up in Illinois. So that was a somewhat of an easy transition into the scary world, quote unquote, of California. It's not that scary, right? But it was an easier transition from the Midwest to go to California. But very quickly, we learned that whether you are working in California or in Illinois, in the veterinary space especially, change is uncomfortable. Started getting a little bit of pushback from the hospital that we were working at, saying, you're bringing too much positive change. I know we hired you to bring positive change, but it's too much. It's too much for us. So very quickly, we got sucked up into the San Francisco Bay Area, where that sense of pace and change is very normal. And it surprised me. Boy, talk about culture shock, Shawn. I remember many different experiences where I had this like, oh, I'm learning a completely different way of looking at the world right now. That's really cool. Okay. Because historically, when I went to work at a veterinary practice, typically it was the boss who would come and say, I've got this idea for a solution we want to implement, or a new product or service we want to roll out. And in the Bay Area, in the startup space, sometimes you were creating new markets from scratch. Sometimes the market didn't even exist. So sometimes your product doesn't even exist. You're literally creating it and learning from the market in real time what works. Like we know that most people are going to want some form of veterinary care service delivery. That's it's not a state. I mean, it's not a commodity by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a clearly defined need in our society. There's some places, some startups in the Bay Area that are creating stuff that truly doesn't exist before. So you have to have this dynamic with the market. We are constantly testing and seeking feedback on what's working and what's not. And I think that old school approach is from a leadership standpoint. You probably don't want to know what's working and what's not from the bottom up. You maybe want to, but a lot of chatter, a lot of noise can be really hard on a leader in that position that feels like they got everything on their shoulders. So this new approach, very similar to that, Shawn, around leadership. It's how do you engage not just your employees, but even your customers in the process of the business learning and development journey.
So Rob, let's do some rapid fire kind of quick Q&A. So what are some benefits, like top 5 benefits of this distributed leadership model? And then what are the top negative things that come to mind, if any, in the model?
Top thing that sticks out to me kind of ties back to what we talked about already around purpose and growth and mastery. To me, when you do this well and you distribute leadership and you use this distributed leadership model, like purpose is the thing. It's like the glue that almost pulls it all together. In traditional, or let's use an example, practical example. In a traditional organization, you might join and have your boss give you a job description. Say, here's your role, go, right? Whereas in a distributed leadership organization, it's like, here's why we hired you for your skill set. Here's the purpose of the organization. Here's the purpose that we think your role could have, but we need you to help us understand this more clearly. All right, so come in and help us define the purpose of your role and how it connects to the purpose of the organization.
And that so resonates for me, Rob, because if anybody that's on the call, you're an owner of a practice, and the purpose of the practice, maybe today, maybe it's unspoken, but is to make money. And how can somebody that's on your team, that's, a vet clinic or vet tech just out of school, relate to that purpose of making you money? What's another potential purpose for a veterinary clinic, Rob, like off the top of your head?
I mean, my goodness, vet med is imbued with purpose. There's so much meaning and purpose in the work that we do. Not many other professions do people figure out what they want to do as an adult when they're 4 and stick with it until they're 26, 7, 8, whatever it is, right? That's kind of rare. So there's a lot of meaning and purpose that's already there. It's just about getting it out into the open and talking about it from a structural and an organizational practice standpoint. That's the important.
And I think that's an important thing. It's a conversation. The like core values and purpose of an organization are not set by the guy or the girl at the top of the pyramid. They're set through conversations on a morning retreat or get away with your staff to try to figure out how you're gonna be different, how you're gonna be better than everybody else. And that shared sense of purpose, it's why organizations scale to thousands of people instead of hundreds. If you're a single practice out there today in this crazy environment of vet med, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of potential. There's so much business out there. And if you can figure out a way to have everybody that's on the ship rowing in the same direction, all trying to figure out how they can contribute, how they can make the organization better, how they can fulfill the purpose, holy moly, it's like rocket fuel, isn't it?
It's rocket fuel. And it decreases turnover because they're sticky. That's a common term, right? It's a sticky. You're wanting to stay with those relationships at your workplace. So I think it reduces turnover. I think you have more engaged employees. We've talked about increasing the speed of your decision making. Allows you to become more innovative because of that very reason. I mean, I think about a lot of the practice owners out there, veterinary practice owners that have made a lot of decisions in the past from a traditional standpoint. I bet you feel kind of worn out. I bet you feel like you got a lot on your shoulders, right? Making every single decision every single time. Like when you start to have distributed leadership and imbue some of the decision-making processes that are a part of it into your organization, all of a sudden you don't have to be the idea guy. Right, the time. You can have the time to go home and have dinner with your kids or go to a baseball game.
And I think it's even different than being the idea guy. You don't have to be the guy with the 5,000 pounds on your back, worrying about every decision that you're making. You can distribute that autonomy to a leadership team, to the entire organization. And then all of a sudden, when there's a decision that needs to be taken, a hard decision, you can go to that team and you can say, like, what do you think? This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Let's have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, as speaking as the CEO of an organization that uses a distributed leadership model, it really feels good when you're wrong. Because
you learned something then.
It feels good when you're wrong because you've leaned into your team and you've learned something. Exactly.
Yeah, and you're better the next day.
So, this conversation could be 600 hours because I know that we're just getting both riled up here, but what are some, what are the pitfalls? Like, what are the things that
I was thinking about this. I've seen different organizations turn on this. Some people call this model also self-management. I don't necessarily like to call it that anymore, because I think that connotation gives the idea that I, as an individual, are going to manage everything else that my manager may have done before. And that's not the case at all. It's not about removing or getting rid of the management work or the work involved with management or leadership. It's about disseminating it to the broader team. Now, I can hear some people out there probably
empowering people to make the right decision and to give them a framework to make that decision. Because I'm, as the CEO of an organization, I'm not always there, and guess what? The people that are on the call that run veterinary practices, they're not always there. So if you can give people a framework to make those decisions and then give them trust, and everybody's going to make mistakes, but if they feel empowered to make a decision, they're going to be bought into the rocket ship.
Yes. I've heard this described with two pillars here. Give them the organizational clarity from a leadership standpoint. So here's our North Star, and ensure that the competence is in place to do that work, and then get out of their way, right? So what are some of the other disadvantages here? I think it's a mistake to think that when you distribute leadership, I can hear some people out there thinking that, oh, well, if it's not my job as leader and I distribute it to everybody, then all of a sudden it's everybody's problem, and then it's nobody's problem. A common refrain: if it's everybody's problem, it's nobody's problem. And yes, I would agree with you. If you've distributed it to everybody with no sense of accountability in there for follow-up, yes, it's everybody's problem, and all of a sudden it's nobody's problem. So one of the disadvantages here is it is a very different way of working. And, it can create a little bit of uncertainty that you have to navigate as a leader. And so there's two.
Discomfort, if you're used to discomfort, if you're used to making decisions and all of a sudden you're trying to let that go.
Very uncomfortable. Yes, but it doesn't mean you're out of control, right? The thing that I want to emphasize here is there's two sides of this coin: autonomy and accountability. Everybody loves to talk about how great autonomy is until all of a sudden you have to make a decision that you have to back up. And then it's really easy to give it to the boss and let them decide, right?
That's right.
It's about shedding that and saying, no, we're going to strip away that safety net and you're going to own it, right? We're going to fail together. We're going to grow together, but you're going to own it, right? And then giving them the decision space to make clear decisions within these clear guardrails that can be mutually defined, but they own it. So two sides of the coin there. It's a very different way of working, can be challenging to navigate. I think it's especially more challenging in the short term. Things like accountability and how you manage conflict, I think, need a rewrite. If you have a boss who's historically come in and held your feet to the fire on metrics, or maybe you come in and solved a problem between you and a coworker, if that's gone, or let's not just say gone, that work is still there. How do you distribute that work to get accomplished to the rest of the team? Still ways of doing so. A lot of it involves using more technologically forward tools, but that also needs a rewrite. That's one of the other challenges with this model.
So I'm here today. I'm in this hierarchical model. It's comfortable. The business is working well. People are happy. People stay a long time, but I'm the boss. But I'm like, you know what? I'd like to grow faster. I'd like to build a more succinct team. Some of this stuff that you're saying is really interesting. So what do I do? How do I move from where I'm at today to this distributed model? What are some steps that I could take? What are some things that I can read? If I'm very interested, what do I do next?
I'd say start with your own mindset. So learn as much as you can on this right now about how you as a leader need to shift. Starting with your own mindset, I think, is the first place. It's funny, we talk about distributing leadership and making leaders out of others, but you as an individual really have to level up your level of leadership to a significant degree in order to distribute leadership and feel comfortable doing so. So I think starting with your own mindset's an important first step. And then I have to say the second step would be to create the right environment for it, which to me sticks out as psychological safety is a word that sticks out really clearly there. Amy Edmondson has done some fantastic work in this space. It's called Teaming. Teaming is her book, Amy Edmondson, on how to create psychological safety and engage people in the decision-making process. Got another book that's always on my bookshelf, Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan. Is a classic in terms of describing real-world examples and how they're making that shift, what's worked well in the past. There's a whole host of other resources. I'm a part of a group of consultants here in the veterinary space called Enlightened Rebels. Just a small group of rowdy people that get together and try to figure this out. We've been trying to figure this out for the last decade of how it shows up in the veterinary space. So there's micro communities of people that are trying to lean into it and figure this out. I know we've got a whole sheet of resources that we can point people to there, but that's just a few. What's another one? Susan Basterfield is a fantastic book called Lead Together. Susan Basterfield, Lead Together. Those would be a couple of the first resources I'd send people to.
That's awesome, Rob. And I mean, we've talked about this so much, and the people that are on the call, they don't know us, but I run a tech startup called Talkatoo, and we really expect everybody on the team to kind of chip in to decision making and chip into directional changes of the company. And really, when you get the entire group of people that are in the canoe rowing in the same direction at the same time, enjoying the seat that they're in, magical things can happen. You can go from nothing to thousands of users using a piece of software that didn't exist a couple of years ago. So I think the work that we're doing is a little bit of a testament for it. So we're like real close to time. I'm really hoping that we've got a bunch of questions. I know we probably will. But, if you're trying to put your arms around this whole thing, it's such a big topic. It's so meaty. There's so much to discuss. If you were to distill it for the people that are here and give them the sales pitch on why they really should give this a try, what would that sound like?
I would say, this is incredibly challenging and not very challenging at all. The biggest challenge that you have will be yourself and getting out of your own way. So for some people, that's harder than others. I think just knowing that starting at that point, you've got a lot of control over how you shift, whether you're the leader in an organization and hoping to be able to shift in that way, or if you're a middle manager, or even just an associate or a kennel worker, like what are the ways that you can influence in this system, right? I think you can learn a lot about, how you can still create some of those positive effects of this distributed leadership role, even if you're in this old school model. I would say I've seen this shift happen in a few different flavors, and maybe this is where we can jump over to some questions. And again, this is a cookie cutter, maybe a cookie cutter thing for you to take home is a lot of people want to ask, show me the playbook, show me the recipe, give me the step-by-step sort of playbook that I can implement and turn this on in my practice. And God love them, because that is exactly the right type of mindset to bring from the 20th century industrial era approach, right? It's give me the playbook, give me the assembly line, tell me exactly each and every step of the process. And I'm telling you, that is the old school approach. The new school approach is there is no playbook. There is no one playbook that works for everybody. There are some broad rules of thumb that you can take and say, how does this apply to my context and my situation and my team and the problem that we're trying to solve? You can do that, but you're not going to find a central playbook that helps you go from right here to over here. I've seen it happen a few different ways. I've seen people make the change slowly with the team that they've got. Seeing this happen within a veterinary practice, practice owner up in VZ, Maine. His name's David Cloutier. He just joined the Suveto network not too long ago. Fantastic example of making change slowly as a team and influencing the people who are on your team to move in this direction. I got a great story we could tell about VZ.
It's actually interesting. We had a question from one of the audience members of, what's it look like in the model, like the hierarchical model, and then the transition, and what are the obvious changes? So
I'll use that VZ as a story to highlight that.
Go for it.
Before I do though, the other two ways I've seen leaders make this shift. So the first one is making change slowly with the team that you've got. I've seen companies make the change suddenly with the team that they've got. Zappos did this. They lost 25% of their executive team within about 2 or 3 days, right? Yeah. So ripping off the Band-Aid may be good, may be bad, depending on what you're trying to get accomplished. I think it certainly rooted out people who didn't believe in the idea. So whether it's successful or not, to be determined. And I've seen companies make the change suddenly with a brand new team. These are startups, companies that start with this idea from the very beginning with a fresh team and a culture that they can build from the very beginning. Morning Stars, a tomato company out in California, a good example of this. So is Buurtzorg. It's a human house call company. Buurtzorg is that company. So a few different examples of how it's shown up in different ways. Let me go back to the story of VZ, how it shows up in a veterinary practice. A couple technicians had been working at VZ for, I think it was over a decade. Core members of the team, very good, successful, high producing, high quality technicians. They didn't work on Fridays. That had been kind of a habit that had been ingrained in their team, that these two did not work on Fridays. Well, over time, the team grew and they grew, the hospital grew and membership grew, and the rest of the team said, well, Fridays are pretty busy now, and we would really love to be able to get your help back on some of these Fridays. And we think it's an important thing to be able to share this across the team, to share this burden of working on Fridays across the team. So the traditional approach, this is a conflict, right? You've just identified a conflict between team members. Traditional approach, your boss or manager would probably hear you complain about this and gripe, and then you'd say, okay, I need to go have a conversation with the people that are involved, and there's an extra job that the leader is now responsible for managing, right? That could either result in trying to play mediator and resolve tension, resolve conflict, or you have to fire 2 of your technicians because they're causing a rift amongst your culture. That would be the old school approach. Well, this new school approach, and this didn't happen overnight. It took several years of working and helping the team grow in this way. But Dr. Cloutier effectively went back to the team and said, you know, you've identified an opportunity for the team to get better, and you collectively, team, think that these 2 team members should contribute their fair share and work with you on Fridays. If you think this is such a big deal to you in this culture, that if they don't want to share the workload on Fridays, then you have the authority to fire them. So decide, team, if you want them to stick around and not work Fridays, or if they're not going to budge, then you can fire them as a group. I give you that authority. And so the team actually went back and said, we really want you to work on Fridays, these 2 technicians. They said, nope, we're not budging. They said, okay, well, we're going to make a decision to ask you to leave. Oh, you can't do that. We're too important. They made the decision. The team owned it. But here's the kicker. Whenever they had increased workload that following week, because of the lack of those 2 technicians, the team rose to the challenge, right? It's like, yeah, we decided this. Yeah, it's painful in the short term, but we're going to get through it. We're going to solve it. We're going to be stronger on the other end of it. Rather than boss made a decision, fired 2 people. Man, they were really important. I don't know if that was a good decision. I'm not going to voice that concern, but now there's this like nidus of tension and dissent amongst the team, right? That's gone when you shift that over to the team. They own the decision. You can still guide it. You still do guide it, but it's with the environment and the structures you put into place more than heavy-handed top-down approach.
Yeah, that's great. And so another question, Rob, have you seen larger animal hospitals, I guess we don't even know the size of that one, but have you seen larger animal hospital or larger organizations be successful with this model?
Super large organizations, probably the one that I would say that I have the most familiarity with would be that one I mentioned, Buurtzorg. It's a human healthcare company, but it started out in the Netherlands and it's now international. It's here in the States as well. So that would be the most, I guess, clear example of a company using it at mass scale in the healthcare space that I'm familiar with. And again, there are facets of this that show up everywhere in different types of cultures and the way they interact with their team. But within the veterinary space, I think VZ is probably one of the most successful ones. I know the O'Brien Veterinary Group out of Chicago was another group that was experimenting with this in terms of especially giving their teams the authority to help shape the budget on an annual basis. So
It's so interesting, like seeing these questions come in, and we really appreciate the questions. It's the whole reason for being here. So this is a good one. Can you give a specific example of how this could work within a private clinic? So we're talking about big, now we're going to talk about small. And I think we have, but how this could work within a private clinic with one location, not a larger hospital or chain or a huge team. I'm struggling to see how the model differs from the simple delegation and increasing responsibility of employees.
okay, I wish, this is why I love having people on the call whenever we do these webinars. I'd really love to dig into like, what is the core problem you're seeing there in your team?
Well, it's interesting because like what I'm reading from this question, and if I don't know how we can take people off mute because I don't do that. So if Will can figure it out and take that person off mute, I'd love to talk to them as well with Rob. But I think that we're seeing something in here. I'm struggling to see how the model differs from simple delegation. So delegation,
Okay.
You make the decision, you one person. This is delegating to a group, right? So that's the specific change, right? It's like you veterinary technicians decide which drugs we're going to put in the cabinets because you have the most experience. And I don't work in a veterinary practice, so Rob, you have to back me up here, but that's what I'm reading into it, right? Delegation is delegating authority to one person. And in this model, it's delegating authority to a group.
Yes, especially from a leadership standpoint, and making sure some of those leadership management tasks still get done. I would say that, oh, you just triggered something for me and then I lost it here, Shawn.
Well, I got another.
Read the question one more time for me.
Yeah, sure, I will, no problem. So basically, can you give an example of a small clinic, not a big one, not a large hospital? I'm struggling to see how this model differs from a simple delegation and increasing responsibilities of employees.
Okay, that's where it was. Okay, so I was saying when I first heard that, it was like, there is still, I think, an element of delegation and work that you as a leader identify in terms of work that needs to be done. I think where it starts to shift is that you as a leader come in and say, not here is what you need to do, but here is why we're doing this as an organization. Here is why your role is important. You figure out how to do it the best and what you need to do to fill out the purpose of your role to the greatest degree possible, because that was probably going to change over time. What you do and how you do it, increasingly more so today, that will change over time. So you don't have to come in as leader and say, exactly, here's what you do, because that'll slow innovation and growth over time, right? Well, I did my job, right? Yeah, but you missed the point. Like the whole industry is going this direction. You should have changed your job and how you do your work. Right? That's not what we're asking people to do today.
We've got a little bit of insight from this person. She says, no active problems right now in the organization. My team and culture is amazing. I just want to make it better. So this person and you, Rob, probably could be best friends.
Probably.
But just a little bit more insight. And I think really, I mean, from my perspective as well, it's about disseminating that decision-making and authority, right? Whether it's creating a leadership team or even, pushing these leaders to these activities and responsibilities down to teams within teams. I think really is what this model is trying to do. It's about empowering the person, no matter where they're at in the organization, to be able to feel like they have the autonomy to contribute to the organization's success and well-being as an organization. That's at the core. That's what this is all about.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I think I couldn't have said it much better myself. Yes, exactly, Shawn.
It's hard to tell if we've had a conversation about this like once or 5 times before. Well, Rob, listen, we're at time. We kind of burned through all the time.
I could talk about this for hours with you, Shawn. And
yes, I know. And it's so funny because I got up at 5 a.m. like I was telling you before we started to come here to Kansas City. And it was a long day and I was really tired. And then we got on this webinar and now I'm wishing it wasn't over. So
now you're jazzed.
I really want to thank you for.
But that's the point, right, Shawn? When you implement it, you find more joy, you find inspiration, and the reason you came to be a veterinarian in the first place.
That's right, and there's systems out there for this, and that's the other thing that I want to tell everybody. There's simple business operating systems that work in vet med. I know people that use them to run their clinic. One's called Traction.
Great.
from an organization called EOS, Entrepreneurs Organization, came out of YPO, if anybody's familiar with that organization. It really helps people kind of take this mindset and adopt simple practices that kind of give you that rocket fuel.
Yep.
So if you're out there, you know, if you're running a practice that has a great culture and you love the people and everything's great, and you want to do more or make it better, like check out some of these resources that Rob's spoke about. Check out Traction and Traction Tools, great resources, and connect with Rob. Rob, how do people find you on the internet?
You can find me over at the at LinkedIn, on LinkedIn. You can email me at rob.trimble@harbor.vet. You can come over and check us out on Harbor and what we're building for veterinary students and other veterinary professionals.
Well, listen, my friend, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to do a quick demo at Talkatoo as promised, so you can disappear and we'll reconnect again somewheres in this earth to talk about this again. And
looking forward to it, Shawn.
Cheers.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much for having me on. Okay, appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
Very welcome, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So the Talkatoo people behind the scenes, I think, William, if you could give me the ability to share my screen, I'll jump into my demo, and feel free to stay, feel free to go, but we really appreciate you being here and being involved in this conversation. And just a second. All right, here we go. So what Talkatoo is a very simple to use little application that runs on top of Windows or your Mac operating system and allows you to type into any application. So any practice management software, anywhere that you can type, you can use Talkatoo. So I'm going to give you a little demo. You can see the Talkatoo application down here. And I'm just going to go into Notepad instead of a practice management system because I have it right here. Press the button on our fancy dictation microphone and watch what happens. Rosie jumped out of a truck yesterday and her owner noticed that she was limping, period. Her appetite was decreased. There was no vomiting, diarrhea, coughing, or sneezing. We really appreciate you staying for the quick demo of Talkatoo, and we appreciate you coming to our webinar. Thanks so much. Now you know a little bit more about Talkatoo and a little bit more about this new model and new way of running an organization. Thanks again for attending. And that wasn't canned. We just kind of made it up as we went along. So you can see that you can type anything that you want. Thanks so much for joining me. It was a pleasure to have you here. And we'll hopefully see you next time. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.